How's it going, everybody? I am the Texas Man. I hope you guys are all having a fabulous day. Please give this video a thumbs up if you guys really enjoy it. Subscribe if you guys have not already. Also, do me the biggest favor of all. Hit that bell notification button so you guys don't miss out on future videos or streams here on the Texas Man channel. With that, of course, we are going to be talking about the final episode of the Clone Wars. Not only is this the final episode of Season 7, but it is the final episode of the show ever. Also want to let you guys know that after this, I will be doing a full review of the entire season. I know I've been doing episodic reviews for each episode of this season, but I'm going to do a collaboration review, talk about what I think were the best parts and the worst parts of this season, all in one video. If you guys have missed any of my review episodes for this season, I encourage you guys to check them out. They are in a playlist in my Star Wars thing, so just check that out, or just use the search engine, and you can find them that way. Oh boy. Guys, I honestly don't get it. Oh. Somehow, guys, I'm going to tell you guys right off the bat, this episode called Victory and Death, the last episode ever for Clone Wars, this is going to be the worst episode in the Mandalorian story arc. So, as always, I'm going to talk about positives and negatives. I'm going to give you guys my final score. I got a lot of problems with this episode. I was so excited and happy and really gung-ho to see how this was going to end. I think, yeah, I really want to talk about negatives in this episode, and it's really a crying shame that I want to talk about negatives for the final episode of a show, especially Clone Wars. I don't understand how you mess up Clone Wars and make the last episode garbage. How do you do that? God. I'm sorry, guys, if you came here thinking that the final episode was going to be amazing, I'm going to be jumping for joy. Well, sorry. Oh, good grief, I can't believe this. What happened? Did they get lazy for the final episode? Like, how did you guys do this? Maybe it's because I had way too high expectations. But at the same time, I'm like, because I've watched all 4 seasons of Rebels like 6 times, and I know what happens after the Clone Wars comes to an end, you know, with Solo and Rogue One and the Rebels show and New Hope and things like that. I'm like, there's certain things, especially in the Rebels show, because I've seen the Rebels show several times, there are things that happen in that show where I'm like, okay, this makes no sense and whatnot. And this episode didn't help clarify those missing links at all. So let's talk about positives before I go into my negative rant any longer. First of all, I liked the opening music. The opening sad music really set the stone. I can't talk. The opening sad music set the tone of the episode perfectly. This episode does have some really amazing action scenes with Ahsoka and Rex against the Order 66 clones, is what I call them. Really spectacular fighting for Maul. I really love the scene in this episode where Maul ends up using the Force and he just obliterates the hyperdrive of the Republic cruiser that's was transporting Maul to Coruscant. And of course, it's got Jesse, a bunch of other clones from the 501st, Rex, and Ahsoka on it. It was really cool to see that. And I also love seeing the Republic cruiser slowly break apart in space while it's entering a planet's atmosphere. And I'm going to have to keep saying planet because this episode never explains what planet the Republic cruiser that everybody's on is crashing into. Also, Rex ends up crying in this episode. And I was like, I never thought in my wildest dreams we would ever see Commander Rex cry. He ends up crying with his helmet on, and Ahsoka ends up taking it off because he's ending up having to tell Ahsoka, it's like the clone army is expendable at this point. The clone army needs to be killed to get out of the way. That way, Ahsoka and Rex can survive the fallout of Order 66. And Ahsoka doesn't want to kill the clones because of friendship and the bond that they've had during this war. And Ahsoka wants to find another way. Well, she comes up with a plan. Of course, it backfires terribly. But it was really interesting to see that Rex is like, yeah, we need to kill them so we can get to the shuttle, so we can get off this, dying spaceship and survive. And at the same time, Rex was realizing that, he's like, we need to kill them. I don't want to kill my brothers, but it's survival of the fittest. This episode also explains why the clone army wanted to not only take out Maul and Ahsoka, but it also explains why Rex was also a target for termination after his chip has been removed. R7 and the rest of Ahsoka's droid friends, they are all killed by the clone army of the 501st, and that was kind of sad. I'm like, so no more R7, droids are basically gone, which I kind of expected that, considering, everything that's droid basically has been scrapped. That happens in the prequel films, because we don't get to see any of those in the original trilogy or sequels. In the end, it was kind of sad to see that all the clones, including Jesse, die when the Republic cruiser crashes on the planet. Anyone that's on the ship, they perish when the ship crashes. It just gone. Maul ends up escaping the Republic, which fits in perfectly with events of the movies and whatnot, and Rebels. Ahsoka and Rex do end up escaping the Republic cruiser before it hits the planet on a Y-wing, which is kind of unique and cool to see that. And then at the end of the episode, two things that I thought were kind of interesting that happened, and I guess it kind of ties in somewhat with Rebels, but I kind of felt like it was supposed to be a little more symbolic, and I just didn't feel all that much emotional connection to these two events. First of all, Ahsoka ends up actually going into the Republic cruiser. This is implied, but Ahsoka, I think, goes into the Republic cruiser, finds as many clones as she can, including Jesse. She puts all of their clone helmets that got her, markings of her face on. She puts them all on these spikes as a burial scene. With the crash planet, and Ahsoka ends up leaving behind her blue lightsabers. I'm sorry, but she ends up leaving her blue lightsabers on the crash planet in front of the gravesite of the clones' helmets and the cruiser. And I really liked that scene. It was really symbolic of the fact that even though Ahsoka was never a Jedi before Order 66 and after and during whatnot, she kind of was tied to the Order for events. Like, if it wasn't for Ahsoka, maybe things would have been different in Attack of the Clones. It might have been different in Revenge of the Sith. It might have been different in the Clone Wars show. Maybe she could have reached Anakin and prevented what happened from him becoming Vader. And in that sense, she probably feels like she failed him in some capacity. And she failed the Jedi, and the Jedi are gone. And so she ends up leaving behind her blue lightsabers on that planet. And then, of course, we get an awesome scene with Vader finding the cruiser, the gravesite, and Ahsoka's sabers. And we also get to see, briefly, and you got to pay attention for this, we get to see the Modus sister, which is in bird form, from season 3 of the Clone Wars, and we get to see that, and that's super important and symbolic as to, of course, season 3 of the Clone Wars and what is to come in the Rebels show. Are you guys ready for my rant of negatives? First of all, this episode is only 23 minutes long. I don't understand this why did they do this? Like, the first episode of the Seed Mandalorian story arc is like 30 minutes. Then the next one is like 26, 27. Then the next one is like 24, and this one's only like 23. Like, why does it go down in runtime? And because this episode is only like 23 minutes long, everything of importance that's happening in this episode feels rushed. And a lot of it feels like it's crammed into a short runtime. Like, I wanted this episode to be 30 minutes minimum. Like, why was this episode so short? Also, this episode, like I was talking about planet-wise, this episode doesn't explain what planet does that Republic cruiser, that Ahsoka, Maul, Rex, Jesse, and everyone else, what planet do they crash on? Because it's completely unclear. It doesn't explain what planet they crash on. Now, when they crash on it, it could be any planet. And then when Vader shows up with the Empire, they're wearing Hoth trooper stuff, and it's snowing, and you can see the destroyed remains of what I think is the Rebels shield generator from Empire Strikes Back. So I'm guessing that maybe that cruiser ended up crashing on Hoth. But if that's the case, why earlier was it not snowing and icing and whatnot? I'm just like, it's super unclear as to what planet they ended up crashing on. Also, this episode doesn't explain as to why the Jedi did not try to locate and aid Ahsoka, the Jedi and whatnot that survived Order 66. Like, Yoda and Obi-Wan both knew of Ahsoka's mission to bring Maul to Coruscant. And if Yoda and Obi-Wan are going to send out a message to all surviving Jedi, even though Ahsoka's not, why didn't they try to help and locate her? I mean, she's a Force wielder. They could have given her a lightsaber and, like, come help us, build the rebellion or something. That's one problem I have with Revenge of the Sith, and the Jedi's like, oh, we lost the war, so let's go into hiding. You have other Jedi and allies and whatnot in the galaxy. Like, you could have used the Mandalorians and they could have helped you. Like, why? You had allies. This episode was really disappointing, especially the ending. And then a couple things. Lastly, I want to talk about negatives. There's a lot of negatives I could talk about, guys, but I want to keep this episode as short as possible. First of all, this episode does not tie in with the Rebel show as much as I really wanted it to. First of all, this episode doesn't explain what does Maul do once he escapes the Republic. Like, how does he survive after Order 66? I mean, we get to see that a little bit in Solo and Rebels, but it's like, how is it that he has control of a crime syndicate still? How does Maul have that special moon base in the Rebels show that we end up getting to see in, I believe, season 3? Why in the world does Ahsoka and Rex separate? Because in this episode, we see that they're both together, they're both scavenging for supplies on that crashed planet with the cruiser, and that's it. This episode doesn't explain why when you start watching Rebels, Rex is on an entire another planet, and Ahsoka is somewhere else. Like, why did they separate? Why did they go their own two ways? This episode doesn't explain that at all. Also doesn't explain why and how Rex met up with other clones that ended up disobeying Order 66 and had their chips removed. Why in Rebels does Rex have other clone allies and whatnot? So that just, I guess, happens. And lastly, for this episode's sake, this episode does not explain how Ahsoka gets her white lightsabers in the Rebel show. Like, she ends up blue, she doesn't have her green and yellow, that's gone from season 5. Her 2 blue lightsabers that she gets from Anakin, she ends up leaving and Darth Vader finds. So how does Ahsoka build those 2 white kyber crystal lightsaber thingies in the Rebel show? Never explained. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that aren't explained from the transition to Clone Wars into Rebels, but those are some of the things I wanted to talk about briefly that I remember off the top of my head. Honestly, guys, this episode, the final episode, Victory and Death, is a mixed bag for me. I really wanted this episode to be amazing. I wanted the Clone Wars to go out with a bang. Yes, it does have some really cool, unique moments that I really enjoyed, but at the same time, because I'm a big Star Wars fan and I know what happens after this episode fails on multiple levels to make the Star Wars timeline and continuity make sense. I'm really disappointed. Maybe some of these things that I am ranting on about and complaining about, maybe those things will get answered in the sequel show to the Rebels show that's supposed to be coming out soon. Maybe that will get explained. Maybe those things will be explained. I highly doubt it though. I mean, if you're going to answer the transition point from Clone Wars to Rebels and tie up those loose ends, plot holes, you think you should have done that in the Clone Wars show, especially in the final episode. You shouldn't have to have a sequel show that takes place many years later to explain the problems that you left behind here. So, overall, guys, I've had a blast watching the Clone Wars, the final season. There's been some dud episodes, there's been some so-so episodes, there's been some really, you know, thought provoking episodes, and then there's been some really good action episodes. So there's something in this season that I think everyone will enjoy and hate at the same time. So with that, guys, I'm giving this episode Victory and Death, the final episode of the Clone Wars and Season 7, an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys in the full and final review for this entire season in an episode coming out very soon. You guys all have an amazing day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.